listening to or watching Strangers in Space. And for the next half an hour, probably knowing us, 90 minutes, we're going to be talking about Doctor Who and previewing Series 13, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Simon.
So, I got one thing to say. Sontarans on horses. Is that not just the best thing ever? Clearly not.
No, I did actually. I did like. So I like the Sontar. I like the look of it. There's been mixed reaction on my Facebook to the redesigned
really?
Sontarans. I kind of like the redesigned Sontaran. I think they've got more texture and a lot more sort of wrinkles. But the Sontaran on horseback is a very good look.
Oh yeah,
that's definitely kind of back to basics.
It's interesting. In profile, they look like something new, but from the front, they look quite revisionist, don't they? They've kind of.
It looks like somebody sat down and watched The Time Warrior for the first time ever, and jotted down all the things they expected to see but didn't, and the things that they expected to see that didn't. The flat nose, the really flat nose that makes the Sontaran look like a boxer or something. In fact, it reminded me of a particular boxer, but it's that look. It looks like somebody who's been involved in physical combat, right? That's something that you probably would have expected to see in a Sontaran, but probably actually hadn't, because it's the kind of thing that you think about when you're watching it rather than when you're making it. And it's the kind of thing that you only think the first time you see it. And then after that, you just get used to what the thing is, and you forget the thing that you thought when you first saw it. And the horse.
I was going to say, it's actually
just to finish my thought.
Yeah.
The horseback thing as well. Time Warrior. You can't. As soon as you see that Sontaran in medieval England, you kind of think, oh, it'll be on a horse sooner or later, like everybody else is. And of course, it isn't, and you forget. But like I'm saying, it's like somebody sat down and watched the Time Warrior for the first time and thought, oh, we'll see a Sontaran on a horse, and here it is.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I think the flat nose is where they've had their faces pressed up against the test tube.
Hey,
I thought it was closer to the Invasion of Time 2 Doctors design, because it had a slightly elongated back and it was a slightly thinner profile. But But where those fell apart for me back in the day were, I think, when it started moving and the fitting of the masks and the sort of variations of it. So this looks a lot more sort of robust and well fitted and well sculpted. So initially I jarred at it because it looked like Sontarans from stories that I wasn't particularly keen with, but I think it does look. I mean, in close up in HD, it looks a lot more like the actual skin of something.
You know, some things don't look especially good in photographs, but as soon as you see them on screen moving, you think, that makes sense. And then there are some things that look amazing in photographs, but when you see them moving, you think, oh dear, that's not so good. The Sea Devils, prime example, they look terrific in photographs, but actually, when you see that the head is a hat that somebody's wearing on the top of their head, it kind of loses the magic. These, they didn't look especially good in the photographs when we saw them out of Doctor Who magazine, but as soon as we saw the trailer, and for what tiny bit of motion we had in that trailer, just like a half a second or something as the camera pans up, suddenly it seemed to make sense, right? Oh, it did to me anyway. Go on.
No, I'd just say I haven't actually seen the Doctor Who magazine on account of having moved and it's being redirected by the Royal Mail.
Oh, sure.
Who aren't the quickest, but we're very grateful for them.
So we're here to talk about Series 13. We know very little about it apart from what's in the trailer. Let's just talk, before we talk about what's in the trailer, about a few other things that they have said. One is that the 6 episodes are going to be all written by Chris Chibnall, with the exception of episode 4, which is Chris Chibnall and Maxine Alderton. Maxine Alderton, who did The Haunting of Villa Diodati last time. So, I mean, it looks like, and this is what we said when we talked about it before, it looks like the 4 episodes we've lost are the ones that would have been guest writers. Are we surprised to see that Chris Chibnall's name is on all 6 and that 5 of them are solo by him? Because, I mean, last time I think there were just 4 solo Chibnall episodes. So in fact, the number of solo Chibnall episodes has gone up by one. I would suggest that's probably because he's not been having to doing revisions and rewrites on 4 episodes by other people. So maybe that's the reason why he was able to concentrate more. Are we surprised, and do we think it's a good thing, Matt?
I'm not surprised. It kind of buys into this theory that we or I had back when we heard it was a curtailed season, that it could be the Chibnall planned episodes or an approximation of them, with the guest episodes sort of dropped. And the extra episode, maybe you're right, maybe he had more time, but I'm guessing it's cheaper and quicker for the main showrunner to write the extra one, and possibly because he's also presumably contracted for the Christmas episode and the one after that. So we're sort of dealing with 8 episodes. So maybe he had a kind of a contract for effectively 2 seasons of 4 episodes, and it's just, split between that. I don't know, but no, I'm not surprised. It does make me. So we know there's definitely one historical story in here from the trailer, and it's tempting to think that might be the one that Maxine Alderton has worked on, because Chibnall does seem to prefer not to do the historical stories.
It has seemed as if that might be the case, so that could well be right. And if this is Napoleonic, which is what it appears to be, I don't think it's
Crimean. So is it? As I've just found out through a Google search, or this is what my Google search is suggesting, because there's a character called Mary Seacole, who was a nurse in the Crimean War, a sort of Florence Nightingale in the Crimean War. So it's actually, I think, and it makes a bit more sense because it does look a little bit more sort of Afghanistan-y, Crimea-y, rather than Spain or France.
Interestingly, the children at the school where I work are currently studying here as well. So that makes sense in some respects.
Fair enough.
There's definitely a Chibnall MO to have a sort of a half Jamaican famous historical character and kind of highlight that, like he did with Spyfall and Rosa, and
About the 2 directors are doing 3 episodes each. Azur Salim is new, not quite new to television, but certainly mostly new, and he comes from having been recommended after having done a short film that Segan Akinola did the soundtrack for. So that's interesting to see, and he's doing 3. Jamie Magnus Stone, who did the finale last time around, he's in for 3. He's doing the first 2, and he's doing episode 4, which might then be that historical one. So, I mean, there's not a lot to be told from that, apart from there is, again, a sort of nice sort of set off between the ones that they know and trust, Jamie Magnus Stone, and somebody new that they're bringing in order to give a little bit of maybe a bit more diversity to the kind of look and feel of it. So have we any thoughts on that? I don't think there's anything particularly to be gleaned from it, really.
I mean, it's a supremely impressive trailer, though, I have to say. I mean, the hope is obviously that it's not like one of these movies where you get a brilliant trailer and a rubbish movie, and vice versa sometimes, But it looks great, as these series have been. So there's plenty of colour, there's plenty of scale. The scale looks great, I have to say. That lovely shot of the battle with red lasers firing. I'm assuming that's a squadron of Sontarans.
That shot of the port with the Sontaran spaceships interspersed amongst the ships or whatever it is, I couldn't quite work it out. And I didn't dwell too much on the trailer. I don't like dwelling too much on trailers because I think that's kind of spoils things when they turn up. So I didn't dwell too much on it. But that reminded me slightly of the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which ends up in the port where they're loading the pods. And then the red grass. And I don't know if the red grass later on in the trailer was a deliberate thing or whether that is just the way something was shot and it's not deliberately a red grass thing. But that reminded me a bit of War of the Worlds. And so I got the impression watching the trailer that we might have something about this sort of surreptitious alien invasion by stealth, spearheaded by the Sontarans, not necessarily being carried out by the Sontarans. But there were other shots, like of sort of clouds covering the Earth's surface, maybe. Things like that. It looked as if, there was this kind of invasion of the body snatchers stroke War of the Worlds type feeling going on there.
I tell you what I really hope is happening is that a lot of the visuals that we've had alongside Jodie's series have been really, and the opening credits have had that real kind of fantasy element to them, and kind of Fantastic Voyage kind of stuff going on, Flash Gordon, clouds in space, that kind of stuff going on, which has been really beautiful. But we've not actually seen any of that within the series itself. Almost like this, almost quite trippy stuff going on. And to see some of that appearing in the trailer is giving me hope that we're going to see that kind of, again, that scale of imagination.
Well, there's a shot where she's standing with that silver-faced fella, and it looks like they're standing on the sea.
Yeah.
So and if that's the case, then this is taking Doctor Who possibly into places where it's not really sort of been, which is kind of what I kind of expected from Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who way back at the start, and it kind of did and it kind of didn't, and it never quite seemed to push far enough, I think, for me, into those directions. And it looks like it's pushing more in these 6 episodes than it did in the last 2 series. We'll have to wait and see. Other things in the trailer that might be worth remarking on: Kevin McNally from the Twin Dilemma, and obviously from the Pirates of the Caribbean films and other famous stuff. Great to see him back in Doctor Who, and hopefully finally in something that's deserving of him. The Weeping Angels. The Weeping Angels clamoring outside the front door of somebody's house. That looks again like it might be the historical episode. Maybe there's 2 historical episodes. That looked fantastic.
Was I right in seeing it's the chap from The Inbetweeners in there as well? I'm trying to remember his name. I should know his name, because can you believe I've got his autograph? I've got a signed photograph of him that I found inside a Doctor Who book. I think it was a copy of Ace that I picked up from a car boot sale, and inside was a signed photograph of him. So I had a Doctor Who signature inside a Doctor Who book before he's even been in the series.
How weird.
Very odd.
The Ood also are back, and the Cybermen. Obviously, there was every possibility the Cybermen would come back. Were we surprised, Matt? Were you surprised to see an Ood in the trailer? In fact, Matt, were you surprised to see as much as you did in the trailer? Because usually the Chris Chibnall trailers have been fairly reticent about showing us too much.
I was happy to see things in the trailer, and I think there was a job that this trailer had to do, which was, because I think fans certainly will know that this has been, a curtailed season filmed under extraordinary circumstances. So one of the jobs of the trailer is to show that this is business as usual. And I think to do that, they have to highlight the fact that, okay, they can't go to South Africa this year, or Spain, or Norway, but look at the scale of this. Look at how good this looks, and I think they achieved that. I think it did feel like it was a Carnival of the Monsters trailer, which I also appreciated, and I really liked that. And also, it's kind of a Russell T Davies fan trailer as well. So it's appropriate that he's coming back. Well, apart from I suppose Weeping.
Well, I was going to say.
So it's sort of.
I was going to say, whether it's conscious or not, it's almost like they've got to kind of leapfrog the RTD news, haven't they? And step up and say, this is, you haven't got to wait 2 years to see Russell T Davies to see that kind of stuff going on. Yeah. So I wonder whether it's been tailored in that way. I don't know.
But I was surprised to see the Ood though. I was surprised. I wasn't. I mean, I'm not blown away. I liked the look. I wasn't blown away by any of the monsters, or surprised really by any of the monsters. I was pleased at how the Weeping Angels looked. I liked the redesigned Sontaran. The idea of Weeping Angels, Sontarans, and Cybermen, they're all kind of time travel-y races, particularly Weeping Angels and Sontarans, obviously. So that's kind of plays into the whole sort of flux thing. So I think this is going to be like aliens bouncing around in time, doing something mischievous with it. Ood less so. Ood feel like they're stuck in the far future, so it's going to be.
Yeah, with the exception of the Ood, the others are all monsters that have some kind of connection with Gallifrey or Gallifrey stories. Yeah. So again, I'm wondering if there's going to be a Gallifrey thing going on this year. You know, especially where it was left. Yeah.
I hope there is, because one of the concerns, the sort of the hangover concerns from the last season is the timeless children thing was a great idea, but only if you tell a story with it and not just reveal it and say, here's the idea, moving on. And they didn't do anything with it in Resolution of the Daleks. So I'm hoping that that's going to carry on, which would mean something to do with Gallifrey. And I think there is a kind of a production still, or a kind of a shot of the characters on something that looks like the Seal of Rassilon somewhere. You can see a sort of an edge of something that could be the Seal of Rassilon. So so that's, I hope they bring Gallifrey back, but mainly because if they do, then it's going to, I think, improve season 2 immeasurably, because they're actually going to do something with this idea rather than, just use it as a kind of a way to make the Jodie Whittaker Doctor a little bit grumpy.
Yeah, and also to make her and basically the character as a whole feel important. And when I say important, I don't mean overarchingly important, but I mean to give the character a bit more of a reason for being the character whose adventures we follow.
Yeah, legacy, and also a legacy. Yeah. So rather than being the Doctor who found things out, she's actually the Doctor that tackled things, that engaged with it. That it feels like they've sort of skimmed the surface of something, and I really want to see him dig down. And from the trailer, it feels like that's still a possibility. It feels like he could do that, particularly if it's to do with time travel. But at the same time, have historical stories, future stories, contemporary stories.
This idea of bringing Gallifrey back again, I mean, we're playing Gallifrey tennis where it's destroyed. No, it's not destroyed. It's destroyed. It's not destroyed. I think if you're going to bring it back, then it may well be that because of what we found out about the Doctor's past is that Gallifrey comes back with a completely different role. So it's reinvented. So it takes on a different, there's no reason for Russell T Davies to get rid of it again, because it was kind of undermining the Doctor's, background, and it was giving him something to fight for and to give it a bit of dramatic weight. Yeah. And if it becomes something different, in as much as they then become a negative influence on the Doctor's life, back to how we were in the 60s, where essentially these were the people he was running away from, then I think that's a good thing. That's the only reason I think they should bring back Gallifrey. And I can't believe I'm saying that, because I'm a big fan. I like the Gallifrey stories. I liked all that going on. But
I think when I say bring Gallifrey back, I mean return to the idea of Gallifrey.
Okay.
But what I'm really thinking they'll do is go to the ruins. So we know Gallifrey is ruined, devastated by this Cyberman thing, and look at the consequences of that. So the actual planet is still there. So they go to the ruins of Gallifrey, and we see the consequences of there not being any Time Lords anymore, which again could be flux. Which we sort of, Russell T Davies sort of did with the kind of the storyline culminating in Time Lord Victorious or whatever, but he did it kind of behind the scenes. So we always saw the Time War kind of on the edge, but we always saw the absence of the Time Lords on the edge. This time, I think it could be 6 episodes saying Time Lords aren't here governing this time flow. The whole of time is in flux. Here's the consequences. Sontarans can do this. Cybermen can do this. Ood are somewhere else doing whatever they're doing.
It could be uncomfortably close.
How they're feeding on this flux thing going on.
It could be uncomfortably close to the Loki storyline, though. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to steal from the best.
Well, and also this would have been written and this would have been in production before anybody had seen Loki, right? And I've still seen Loki, so I don't know quite what you're talking about. But yeah.
Oh no, and also these things happen, though, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, it happens,
especially in Hollywood.
Well, look at Marvel and DC are both like trailering alternate universe stories with the Flash and with Spider-Man No Way Home.
But I look at also Chris Chibnall's first Doctor Who story was 42, which was written and produced, and then the movie Sunshine came out, which told almost exactly the same story, right? So, it's even happened to him in Doctor Who before. Just to add as well, Jacob Anderson's character, Vinda, I think is another pointer towards there being something Gallifrey going on, because every time I see that character, it just screams Gallifrey to me. In fact, he screams early Doctor at me. Whether he'll turn out to be an early Doctor, I don't know, but that's what he screams at me. But I certainly think he's something to do with Gallifrey. And even if he's not from Gallifrey, I think his storyline will be something to do with Gallifrey. Watch me be proven completely wrong now. There's one more thing in the trailer I wanted to bring up to ask your opinion on before we talk about, maybe for a few minutes, talk about the promotional campaign as a whole, because we had an interesting weekend last weekend. And I certainly want to bring it up, even if only briefly. But the other thing from the trailer I just want to mention is I don't know if you appreciate the name yet, whether you've heard it yet, but apparently the name is Carvanista, the Chewbacca creature. What did you think of that? Simon, what did you think of that?
Honest answer.
Yeah, go on, be honest.
It certainly brings to mind the RTD era, certainly. I know that Russell T Davies liked this idea of aliens having a basis in real life, animal life.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily go along with that. I understand the logic behind it, about the familiarity for the viewers. I don't necessarily go along with it, really. It's probably all about the performance. I think it'll be different seeing it working.
Yeah. But I also think Chris Chibnall's thing is not about familiarity, but it's about offsetting the cute with the really hideous. So you have, for example, the Pating, which is like this really cute little sort of tiny little, teddy bear like creature that's deadly dangerous. And then you've got like I can't remember his name, the guy from first episode with the teeth all over his face.
Tim Shaw.
Tim Shaw, yeah, Zimshar. So you've got things like this creature with teeth that he's stolen from the mouths of his victims all over his face. And then the Pating or whatever. What I'm saying is Chris Chibnall seems to enjoy putting really nasty stuff in alongside really cute stuff. And sometimes the cute stuff is the nasty stuff. The episode Orphan, I can't even remember what it's called now, Orphan 55, where you've got that teddy bear thing at the start, and then by the end of the episode you've got these really hideous things that turned out to be de-evolved human beings.
Devolved working class.
Yeah, well, but you know what I'm saying? This seems to be Chris Chibnall's MO, is not so much that it's about familiarity necessarily as it's about the juxtaposition of cuteness and nastiness, I think.
Chucky.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Matt, what did you think of it?
I quite liked it. As with the Sontaran, so I see it initially and I think, oh my god, what have they done? But actually, when you see it a few more times, I don't know. I still don't know what they've done, but I think they've done it quite well. So this isn't a Thal or the Terminus costume.
No.
And as
Have
Simon
you seen
said,
the full costume with the armor and stuff.
Yeah. And I think it looked quite good. And as Simon said, if it's moving, that's when you get the real test of things like this.
And when you hear his voice,
yeah. But it's got personality, and I think it's not far off from. I mean, Chewbacca isn't a hugely original, a big walking dog thing. It's become a cliche because of Chewbacca. And obviously this is a riff on Chewbacca, but if it's well made, it doesn't really matter to me too much.
No. So I'm going to float a little theory, and my little theory is this. There's been a lot of consternation amongst fandom that the promotional campaign wasn't happening soon enough, that we didn't find out when the first episode was going to be broadcast early enough, that they didn't seem to have a trailer, that things just weren't happening, that nobody was coming on the telly to promote the series. And everybody was saying, where's the Doctor Who promotional campaign? And people were starting to get a bit weird about it. People were starting to get angry about the fact that there didn't seem to be a Doctor Who promotional campaign. And that's because the first episode of Doctor Who is going out on October the 31st. So when the first episode was going out on October the 7th, the promotional campaign for the series kicked off in mid-September. And when Doctor Who was starting on August bank holiday, as it did 2 or 3 times, I think 3 times or thereabouts, the promotional campaign kicked off in July. So people kind of expecting the autumn Doctor Who promotional campaign subconsciously to kick off in the late summer or early autumn. And as we got to October and there'd been no promotional campaign, people were like, they're not doing anything to promote Doctor Who. And people were starting to get angry and frustrated about it. But the fact is, the broadcast trailer went out 3 weeks ahead of the broadcast date, which is pretty much standard for the last 15 years since the programme came back. That's how they do it. There's a 60-second trailer that goes out 2 or 3 weeks before the first episode is due. There's an appearance on Graham Norton. You know, there was a Comic-Con appearance this year, the same as there had been a few times previously. In other words, this year we've not just had all the promotion we do usually have, and about the same amount of time before the first episode as we generally speaking usually get it, but we've also had extra stuff too that I'll go to in a minute. But I mean, do you think my theory about people's expectations holds water? Because what's happened is it's only 6 episodes, so it's broadcasting later, so the promotional campaign is kicked off later. And I think that, rather than the lack of a promotional campaign, I think the fact that it's just kicked off later in the year has probably led people into thinking that there's less going on, when in actual fact it's just the same amount of stuff, but just 3 weeks later than they maybe expected it. Does that sound plausible? Yeah. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Which one?
Look, I've got a bit of a theory, which is that if you think back to something like Doctor Who Confidential, and we all know that one of the positives about that series was that it got an awful lot of people interested in how TV programs were made and things like that. And it's brilliant that people are passionate about this show. And I know that, you know, at some point you're probably going to be, I think you're going to talk about the ratings and things like that
later on. Yeah.
And you do that because you're interested in the figures, and you try to look at the facts behind it all. But equally, there's this danger of a small amount of, no, it sounds wrong, I'm going to reword it. It's basically that people have taken an interest in how these things are put together and how they're put out. So they take an interest in the publicity because this is their passion. This is the thing they love. But it's kind of the equivalent of looking over the shoulder of your plumber when you know a little bit about pipe work.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that to disrespect anyone. I think we're all guilty of it. If we have a little bit of knowledge, like if I had somebody who was going to come and try and fix my computer, because I know a little bit about computers, I'd be looking over their shoulders and saying, "Oh, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that?" And they'll be there going, "It's okay, just let me do my job."
Yeah.
So, and I think people's enthusiasm maybe spills over into expectations that they are, and equally, we all have this insecurity that the show is being promoted and that they make sure that as many people see it as possible. So it's all completely understandable, but at the same time I think we've got to chill our boots, and I think you're right. I think it probably is the same, and I think because the timings of these series are changing almost yearly now, and especially with the lockdown and the way that there's been a knock-on effect with the way the show's being made and how many episodes we've got, that it's all over the place. So we have no idea how it's all working, but as it is, they've kind of held. It feels like they've held back and suddenly gone bang with this massive trailer. So I think it's.
I think the trailer was worth waiting for too. Usually on say YouTube when they post the trailers, there's a lot of knockback. This time, instead of like 5,000 dislikes and 2,000 likes, this one's got, as at the time of speaking, 8,000 likes and 1,000 dislikes. And I went down the comments something I don't usually do, but I thought I'd have a look this time to get the sort of gist of how much positivity there is and how much negativity. And I didn't look at all the comments, but I did not see a single negative comment, not one. So I think the trailer's gone down very well. Matt, I'm going to ask you a different question just to keep things moving along. Oh, unless there's something you desperately want to get out. Go on then.
So I agree that I think the trailers as they've been released have been pretty much the same as the trailers in the past. I think that's what, so fans seem to be consternated about that, or in consternation about that. But I think there is a sort of a core of reality in terms of the information that fans are getting, because Chibnall, much less than Stephen Moffat or Russell T Davies, doesn't do things like interviews, or he doesn't sort of drip feed DWM details from the sets. And I think that information is the stuff that fans get that the general public doesn't get. So that's very important to fans. That's private information for fans. And Chibnall's much less open about that. He doesn't do the kinds of regular monthly producers notes, or here's how it's going, or here's a secret word that might give you a hint in that.
The ironic thing,
I don't think that's a problem. No. But I can see how, if you're a fan who's grown to expect that, then actually it's not necessarily entitlement, but it's disconcerting to have that sudden secrecy and then have that information revealed with the rest of the world. And you stop being like you start feeling like you're not being treated like a fan anymore. You're just being treated like a normal viewer. So there is, I can't empathize with that, but I can see where that would then transform into, well, the publicity for this is rubbish.
The ironic thing is that on the week of Fugitive of the Judoon last time around, everybody said, oh, now I see why we don't get too much information from Chris Chibnall, and I'm glad we don't. Because if I'd known anything about that episode, it would have been spoiled. And that episode was an amazing experience. Long may it continue that he doesn't tell us anything. And here we are 18 months later, and the very same people are saying, why is he telling us nothing? He's spoiling it for me.
But the skill of those DWM kind of drip feeds was they gave you what you thought were going to be twists. But actually, they gave you like the minor twists in the season, and then suddenly the master appears at the end, or the master disguised as another character, or this character dies. So
we've got 6 episodes, and we may well get an awful lot more of that across these 6 episodes, because I think Series 12 is probably an indication of the way Chris Chibnall is going to want to do Series 13 to a degree in terms of that kind of stuff. There are couple of other things I want to bring up about the viewing figures and that, which I will come to. We're going to go to a little sort of mid episode breather for you two in a second, so I'll come back to that in a minute. The thing about last weekend, though, I was out last Saturday. I was out somewhere where there wasn't any internet, and when I got back, I discovered that the Doctor Who social media accounts had all disappeared, which nobody was quite sure was deliberate or an accident. And then when they reappeared, it was as we had a trailer of the Doctor saying, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Breaking through from another dimension or something, whatever. Either way, between that and that sort of 20-second broadcast date trailer and a few things with Russell T Davies and various other stuff, like the Sontaran ship being projected into the sky above Liverpool, and the pictures of the Sontaran ship breaking through into the computer terminals on the platforms of Liverpool railway stations and stuff like this. I believe Doctor Who, insofar as I could tell, Doctor Who was trending on Twitter for 48 hours without break last weekend. Every time I logged on for 48 hours, or possibly even longer, this was until well into Monday, Doctor Who was still trending. So whatever people might think about bringing down those media accounts, that's an amazing achievement in terms of social media. But what I wanted to say about that was I really got this fantastic sort of 1970s conspiracy thriller type vibe about it. To have the social media accounts being taken out at source by the BBC for, I believe they were out for something like 4 days before people really noticed, and it sort of all kicked in. There were other things as well, like the Doctors being rebranded as Fugitive Doctors on Google. Apparently that had taken place some time ago, so I don't know if that was tied in with this or not. It could possibly be. The whole point of it is I came in on Saturday afternoon to see all this stuff going on, and I just got this massive sort of 1970s conspiracy thrillers vibes, and I've got to say it really ticked all my boxes. I know a lot of people were complaining about it or thought they'd messed it up in some way. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Matt, what did you think of all of that?
I was less giddy than you. I wasn't upset that
and I got it all in one go.
I wasn't upset that they deleted the accounts, obviously, because I got this vision of a kind of a marketing meeting with sort of early 20-year-olds going, right, here's how we go viral.
Yeah.
I quite liked, and there was a sort of a treasure hunt going on in Liverpool. There were things on Google Maps as well a few months ago.
Yeah.
I don't think it was 4 days it went down for. I think it was less than that.
Oh, maybe, yeah. I got it all in one go, so obviously I was trying to take in all the information all at once.
And it definitely worked, because it definitely got people talking about it, even if they were complaining about it. And I think the complaints from fans were partly this is a source of their information, so you've cut off a source of their information.
And also fans are used to having the same thing, so when you do something different, it's a bit of a shock to the system.
And they just released a trailer for the season 17 box set, so that had suddenly appeared and then gone down with the whole platform. However, you could probably get it YouTube and various other places. And then there was a bit of consolation because it seemed like they'd wiped out all the followers from the Doctor Who account, but it sounds like they kind of trickled back in over time. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to see kind of modern marketing techniques. I find it a little cringy when people try to go viral with things. But
this was almost like the opposite. It was kind of like they made a decision to do the opposite. It was almost like it was that they'd made a decision to get off the internet altogether in order to have everybody talking about them. So it was kind of a really sort of backhanded approach to doing it. But I don't know. It just felt like it really worked to me. Simon, what did you think of it all? Were you even aware of it all going on? Because I guess you had to be looking for it to sort of see it, I guess.
Yeah, I knew because people were talking about it, and as soon as they said, "Oh, it's every platform has gone," I thought, well, yeah, obviously that's intentional. So that's kind of my job.
Yeah, but you say this, but this was about a week after Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp went down because of a server error.
But when you look to the platforms that had gone down, obviously they're owned by different people, so therefore it was orchestrated. But why not? It's not been done before, so why not?
Yes. Right. Okay. I'm going to have a short sort of break, or a break for you two, not a break for me. And then afterwards, I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict to the pretty exact place what the viewing figure for the first episode back and the average viewing figure across the 6 episodes are going to be, which I have worked out mathematically, all of which I'll explain not in excruciating detail, but in a fun way after this slight break. Are you ready? Okay, so we had an email from Tristan Alfaro in Australia after our episode that we did about the return of Russell T Davies. So I thought I might as well read that out here, seeing as we're sort of doing a follow-up to the Russell T Davies thing, I guess, in a way, by doing this like this on video and that as well. Anyway, he says, "Hi strangers, enjoyed your discussion on the return of RTD. Thought I'd send you some thoughts. My gut reaction is cautiously happy. We know he'll do a great job, but there is naturally a feeling it's a backward step. I reckon we'll see a slight restructure of the way the production team works. I think Russell will take what we think of now as the showrunner position for a year or two before stepping back into effectively the old executive producer role with Jane Tranter and Julie Gardner, overseeing someone else in a showrunner-esque position, but with slightly less decision-making power than the current showrunner. What I'd like to see for the 60th, knowing it would never happen, an anniversary miniseries with individual episodes for whichever past Doctors they can get. Say you have one episode with McGann, one with Eccleston, unlikely, one with Tennant, one with Smith, one with Capaldi, also unlikely, and one with Whittaker, in which she regenerates at the end. The episode falling on the 60th is then either a big team-up, where the old Doctors all get together to help the new incarnation off, with the drawback that this overshadows the newcomer, or, my preference, you have the new Doctor solving the overarching situation baddie, and all the others have been facing in their episodes before heading off into time and space, ready for their first full series. As for casting, I honestly feel it needs to be a woman, as casting a man will feel like confirmation for the people opposed to a woman in the role that they were right. I've only seen Lydia West in a few short snippets, but she certainly feels right. Going into the future, as you all discussed, I think having a range of spin-offs would be ideal. A long-running Sarah Jane Adventures style show for the kids, with either Sophie Aldred or Katie Manning, or both. A bunch of limited-run miniseries that can tell other stories for adults. Think what Star Wars is doing, like their limited-run Obi-Wan series coming up. The 6-episode McGann run, Rose and the Human Doctor in their alt universe. The Romana Adventures, animations with older Doctors, the Missy Chronicles. So many possibilities, and maybe, just maybe, RTD and Bad Wolf are the right people to make this happen. They could truly build an empire of the wolf. Thanks for the great podcast. Always enjoy hearing your thoughts on Doctor Who, films, music, etc. Tristan. Well, thanks, Tristan. I think he pretty much says a lot of the stuff that I think we thought ourselves, in a kind of a way. But yeah, definitely some thoughts there that sort of go along with the stuff that we said. Either of you want to comment on that before I move on to the other thing?
I think Eccleston's absence, obvious absence, probably makes a kind of a grand reunion, because you get a bit like the Five Doctors effect. The Five Doctors is great, obviously, but you know that Tom Baker decided not to do it from watching it, and that is a flaw to it, and that's not a flaw that you'd get in a modern series that has a huge amount of planning. So to have every modern era Doctor back apart from Eccleston would feel a bit weird, I think. But having Tennant back, just Tennant back, or just Matt Smith back, or Tennant and Matt Smith back, that would be possible. Or Paul McGann.
Make no bones about it. The 50th was the silver anniversary, and the next big one, the 75th, isn't it? So 60th is a bit of an odd. So why not do something which is a little bit different? And when I say a minor celebration, I don't mean that. I just mean that it's not a landmark. We're quite the same way, is it?
Except we're in a weird position of having two celebrations, because we've got the 100th anniversary of the BBC.
Yeah.
And the 60th anniversary, and I think they're now talking about the 100th anniversary. Doctor Who's celebrating the 100th anniversary of the BBC. And that could, and I'd assume they're looking for reasons to have an anniversary Doctor Who special, because I think they're they are more popular. They get like more viewers, and they have big impact.
And obviously they have said we're going to have one, so something is on its way. I still think it's not unlikely that Russell T Davies will use it as an opportunity to cast somebody for a single episode Doctor who you couldn't get for a series. Somebody of the magnitude of, I don't know, the two names I said were Hugh Grant and Robert Pattinson, and I don't think it necessarily would be either of those. But you see what I mean? Somebody who might come in to do 4 or 5 weeks' work and do a 60-minute special who wouldn't come in for 9 months. Anyway, we've got an edition of Logan's Look, which for anybody who doesn't know, Logan is a 10-year-old Australian who's watching through the whole of Doctor Who in order with his dad, and his dad, Adrian Sturrock, is sending us Logan's annotated thoughts. And Logan has reached the second half of Series 11. And there's going to be a real shock to the system for us oldies in this. So I'm rather glad this has turned up when it has, because I'm quite pleased to see what he's got here. But we'll get to it.
Some of you are older than others, or some of us are older than others. I just want to point out.
We're all being
accused of a 50-year-old.
When we're all oldies when we're compared to a 10-year-old, Matt. On Kablam, he says the story was good. It was a very different type of story, and I like how the Doctor had ordered a fez. I thought it was good how all the work was done by the robots, and the robots looked okay. It was very strange how Charlie was trying to kill people with exploding bubble wrap, but he scores it 79 out of 100. The Witchfinders, he says this story was good because it was a different type of story, being about religion and things like that. It didn't make much sense at first why the witches were being dunked, but it made more sense as the story went on. It was a bit sad how people accused of being witches were being killed. King James was good, and there were quite a few jokes in the story, but I thought the Morlocks were a bit strange. I could always tell that something was up with Becca Savage when she dunked the Doctor and had mud tears coming out of her eyes. Score 78 out of 100, so that's 1 point fewer than Kablam. It takes you away. This story was good, and it was quite different. The house looked a bit strange when the Doctor and her friends first turned up, and I also thought it was strange that there was a creature in the woods. It was interesting when they went through the mirror into the alternate world, but it was a bit strange when they were on the other side of the mirror. It was confusing when Grace and Eric's wife seemed to be living in the different house. However, I expected that they weren't really those people. The frog was very strange, and it was sad how the Doctor made a new friend but had to leave it behind straight away. Score 75 out of 100. The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. This story was very good, and it raised many different questions at the beginning, such as why the crystal thing was important, why Tim Shaw was there, why everyone was under Tim Shaw's control, and how he had survived. It was different how this story wasn't a usual series finale wrapping up the season. This is okay because there haven't been any things raised during the series which we needed to find out answers to. Score 86 out of 100. Resolution. This story was good, and it was nice to see a Dalek again, even though it was different to other Dalek stories because most of the time the Dalek looked like a squid and was controlling a human to move around. It was interesting how the Dalek built itself a new machine to travel around in. Ryan's dad was good and a very different character because of his relationship with Ryan and Graham. Score 83 out of 100. And so, in conclusion, Dad says, so, for Jodie Whittaker's first series, Logan's favourite stories were The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos and Resolution. Ranskor Av Kolos getting the highest score of all, while his least favourite stories were The Saranga Conundrum and Demons of the Punjab. My favourites, on the other hand, says Dad, were Demons of the Punjab and Rosa, while my least favourites were The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, an all-time bottom 10 story, and The Saranga Conundrum. Regards, Adrian.
P.S. Logan is now up for adoption.
Or, I should say, Logan is the future of the series, and the future of the series likes The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. So what do we fogies know?
I have to say, with a lot of the reactions to the trailer, this links into that. I was reading on Twitter and reading this thread, like you say, it was all positive comments, and it was really lovely to see. You know, there was compliments about the Saguna Ganola and a lot of the other stories and the characters that were coming back and all that sort of thing, and that's great. It just goes to prove that every era, as disconnected as we may have felt at times, we've still appreciated the stories, but every era of the show has its fans, and that's healthy, isn't it? It's good.
On the subject of viewing figures, there's been a lot of talk, and not just on viewing figures, but AI scores and things like that. There's been a lot of talk about, amongst a certain group of fans about how this is disappointing and that's disappointing and so on and so forth. I thought for this episode I'd actually look at what's been going on. Okay, Matt, I know you're not interested in this.
Simon's left the room.
Simon needs the toilet, I'm guessing. But I think this is a conversation worth having, because I do think this is going to be a conversation through the series, whether it's a conversation that we have necessarily amongst ourselves, but our listeners and viewers will certainly be interested. And I just thought it might be nice to have some proper context. So what I did was I went back to the middle of the series in 2005, the middle of the first series in 2005, and looked at the top 10 programs then. And I went to the exact midpoint between then and now, May 2013. And I looked at the top 10 programs in May of 2013 so I could compare what was happening halfway between 2005 and now. And I also looked at the latest figures we've got, which is October 2021, which isn't May. And you'd think October would be slightly up on May because it's darker nights. So I thought, bearing in mind that it was still a relatively fair comparison. So the top 10 programs in the week ending 15th of May 2005 had an average of 10.19 million viewers. They included 5 episodes of Coronation Street, 4 episodes of EastEnders, and 1 episode of Emmerdale. Doctor Who was actually 17th overall in that week. It was Father's Day. And above it in the charts, there were only 4 discrete programs. So if you counted Coronation Street once instead of 6 times, and EastEnders once instead of 6 times, Doctor Who would actually have been 5th for the week. But as it was 17th. Doctor Who got 8.056 million viewers. So Doctor Who was getting about 8 million viewers back then against a weekly top 10 average of 10.19 million viewers. The context of that will become apparent when we look what happens in May of 2013. So exactly halfway between then and now. The top 10 programs for the week ending 19th of May 2013, which include 4 episodes of Cora, 2 episodes of EastEnders, but also The Apprentice, the Eurovision Song Contest, and Britain's Got Talent. The top 10 programs, even with heavy hitters like that, 7.92 million average. In other words, 77.7% of what it had been in May 2005. So in the 8 years between May 2005 and May 2013, the top 10 programs had lost almost 25% of its viewers. Come forward to October 2021, the top 10 programs now, which includes 4 Coronation Streets, 2 Silent Witnesses, 2 Strictly Come Dancing, a Blankety Blank, and a Gordon, Gino, and Fred road trip, whatever the hell that is.
I saw that. It's quite good.
But was it? Well, it got into, It was number 6 in the top 10.
Okay.
Which got an average between the whole top 10 of 6.33 million viewers. In fact, only 3 of the programs in the whole top 10 got above 6 million viewers. And it's only because Strictly Come Dancing got 8 and 9.5 million viewers between its 2 episodes that the average was even above 6 million there. That's 79.9% of what it had been 8 years previously. But, and here's the crucial thing, that is only 62.1% of the top 10 in May of 2005. And remember, that's May when you've got sunnier days and, sunshine outside for longer into the evenings. So for viewing figures to be down to 62.1%, that is quite a significant difference. Doctor Who, if you look at the most recent series of Doctor Who at that point, and I took an average episode, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, that got 5.07 million viewers, which puts it not far outside that top 10. If it had been on that chart, it would have been 13th. Actually, on the week that The Haunting of Villa Diodati was broadcast, which was an autumn week, so that's, a winter week actually rather, wasn't it? That was a February episode. So that's when viewing figures are probably at their highest, because that's the time of year when you've really got dark evenings from fairly early. That was actually 31st on the chart of the week it was broadcast, would have been 13th on the chart had it been that chart in October. The point I'm coming to by this illustration, viewing figures have dropped by not far off a half across the last 16 years. 62.1% is what they're down to, and that's October as compared to May. If I'd compared May to May, it would probably have been something like 55%. And the point is this, in about 2010, we started to have something that we now take for granted, something called a smart TV. By about 2013, 2014, smart TVs began to be ubiquitous. I looked this up, and I think it was 2014 is when it tipped over in the United States, which is where we had figures for. Didn't have figures for the United Kingdom, not that I could see. I think it was 2014 or early 2015 when the number of households in the United States that had smart TVs tipped over to above 50%. In other words, more than half the households had smart TVs, and obviously that figure now will be way, way above that because we're another 7 years on from that now. And we're talking about that was 50% across 4 years or something since they've been properly introduced in shops. Smart TVs allow you to watch whatever you want whenever you want to watch it. That wasn't the case before. The case before, whatever people might remember about it, the case before was if you wanted to watch something at a time other than when it was broadcast, you had to record it when it was broadcast. You couldn't download it afterwards or stream it. You had to record it at the time of broadcast and watch it after. That's the difference that smart TVs have made. And that sounds like it's a fairly innocuous difference because as viewers, we've kind of been getting used to being able to watch things when we want over the years to a greater degree or less. You know, one of the things about having a Sky TV set or a Freeview TV set, which gives you the option of 100, 200, 500, nearly 1,000 channels, is that you can pretty much tune in and watch, I don't know, last week's Have I Got News For You, last year's Have I Got News For You, whatever, on any day of the week, because Have I Got News For You is showing on about a dozen different channels during any given week. So we kind of getting used to being able to watch what we want when we want, but smart TVs has made that something that's absolutely definitive. We can just sit down, press the red button, for want of a better word, bring up Netflix, bring up iPlayer, bring up Disney Plus, bring up Apple TV, bring up Amazon, bring up all these different services and just choose anything. Bring up YouTube and bring up stuff that, you know, isn't even on the streaming services. We can almost sit down and especially if you know where to look, watch any program from anywhere in the world, any country in the world, from any year in the world. We can pretty much find it and watch it on our telly when we want to, at a time of our choosing in this day and age. And the difference that makes to broadcast television is massive, because here's the difference. Back in 2005, if you wanted to watch something on television on BBC at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, rather, you had a choice. If you wanted to watch something that was new, that wasn't something that had either been broadcast previously on another channel or that had been brought in from abroad or from some independent to be shown for the first time on terrestrial telly, for want of a better word, you probably had a choice of about 3 or 4 programs, maybe 5 between the 2 BBCs, ITV Channel 4 and Channel 5. You basically had a choice of about 5 programs. And so I would contend that not necessarily the majority, but certainly a vast number of the people who were watching Doctor Who when Russell T Davies was in charge of Doctor Who last time around, were watching Doctor Who not because they wanted to watch Doctor Who, but because Doctor Who was the thing they most wanted to watch out of the things that were on offer. Now, when what's on offer is anything that's ever been made by anyone ever, the people who are watching Doctor Who when it's being broadcast are going to be the people who want to watch Doctor Who, or the people who can't be bothered to find anything else, or have hitherto yet to find the means to do so. And so what I'm saying is, and this is not just true for Doctor Who, it's true for everything else, I don't think the viewing figures have anything to do with the quality of the programming. I think the viewing figures are solely to do with the availability of other programs to watch instead. You know, you didn't have The Mandalorian in 2005. We didn't hardly have anything science fiction wise in 2005. Battlestar Galactica, I think, was the biggest thing coming out of America at the time. I think that started just slightly before Doctor Who. These days, you can watch the whole of the Marvel universe, including multiple spin-off TV series, plus all the ones that Netflix and what have you made previously as well. They're all available all the time for you to watch whenever you want. There are so many programs being made for people these days. I think it's difficult to sit down and watch broadcast telly. The actual live viewing figures for Doctor Who are something like a quarter of the people who watch it. The number of people who watch it later on the same day outnumbers the people who actually watch it live. People will just turn on the telly at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock on a Sunday night and say, oh, let's watch Doctor Who now. It was on earlier. It's ready to watch. That's its publication date. And then it goes to stream. And iPlayer is a streaming service. So Doctor Who is streaming from the moment of its publication, just as, I don't know, Stranger Things is available to watch from the moment of its publication via streaming. The same is true for Doctor Who. It's just that its publication happens to be broadcast. I don't know. I'm going to go on and say a couple more things, including obviously my prediction for the figure, which was, worked out according to the way the figures had been going and according to various criteria like that. But I mean, Matt, presumably you've got something you'd like to add about all the things I just said. You've almost always got something to add.
I mean, I think you're right. I don't think mathematics is really feeding into it, because I think
the math is going to be.
I'm not an apocalyptic fan. I don't believe that. Obviously, the BBC is always on the verge of cancelling Doctor Who. That's the first thing I think. I think, though, that the BBC, when it's looking at Doctor Who, isn't hoping to get the viewing figures it expects to get, because I think at the moment we're in a landscape where television programs are a bit like social media. Some things go viral, some things just suddenly take off. Vigil, Bodyguard, Line of Duty. You get these either surprise or not surprise hits that just suddenly, not just viewing figures, but everybody's talking about it on Twitter and Facebook. And that's what I think the BBC is looking at. They want something that's going to cause ripples in the ocean. And I think they absolutely want that with Doctor Who, because they wouldn't just say, well, what we really want from Doctor Who is something that just, appears and that'll be fine. We'll be fine with that. They want it to be like Line of Duty, like Vigil. They want it to have impact.
But of course, the one problem you've got there is Doctor Who's been around for 16 years, so it's really difficult to make Doctor Who be that series that goes viral in that case. And you're right.
That's the Line of Duty has been around for quite a long time as well.
But it went viral with its first series and has continued in that. And here's the thing. Almost all the series that have had viewing figures that have been above the average across the last 10 years have been detective dramas.
Yeah.
So you're talking about Endeavour, you're talking about Line of Duty, you're talking about Silent Witness, you're talking about Death in Paradise. And this is why I think Chris Chibnall tried to reposition that first series of Doctor Who as something more equivalent to Death in Paradise when he did series 11 back in 2018, which I don't think necessarily worked, but I think he was trying to feed into that, because that's it. It is. And look, the top 10 I said just then, apart from Coronation Street, the only other fictional series in that top 10 for 2 weeks ago, I think it was, let me just have a look, week ending 3rd of October 2021, the only program that's in that top 10 that's not a soap opera, but that is fiction, is Silent Witness. And presumably Endeavour, I think, unless I'm mistaken, Endeavour's just come back, so that'll be doing the same amount of business. But Silent Witness, even there, as a detective drama, is getting 6.1 and 5.9 million viewers for those 2 episodes on Monday and Tuesday. So even that's not doing sort of 10 million gangbusters.
No, but I still think it's, yes, viewing figures, but it's also something less tangible. It is.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It is about, because viewing figures are so much harder to kind of quantify now. It's about, as you said earlier, how long is Doctor Who trending on Twitter? How many people are how many people are talking about it? What's the sort of the debate about it? It's that sort of thing that signals the success of the series, and it's sort of thing that you really have to be an expert to be able to see. I mean, we can see it happening, but we see it kind of mediated through commentators saying, well, this is really big here and here. And Netflix, I don't think Netflix release viewing figures.
They have some. They have some. What they release instead is how many minutes were accessed.
Right.
So it's difficult to judge because they also release overall figures rather than weekly figures. So they will say how many minutes of such and such a series were accessed up until such and such a date.
Yeah.
We have had, this is interesting, we have had viewing figures for the second series of The Mandalorian. The first series of The Mandalorian obviously was initially published before Disney Plus had launched in the UK. So the first series of The Mandalorian we were able to get figures for was the second series. And here's the interesting thing. They did it per household. They didn't do it per viewer. But what they did was how many machines had accessed the series. And the viewing figure for The Mandalorian was across series 2, the 8 episodes, each episode in the first, and I think I'm getting this right, so bear with me. Across the first week, each of those episodes was accessed on average by 300,000 households. And let's say, if we're being generous, that's 2 people per household. The Mandalorian was basically being watched by about 600,000 people. The daily viewing figure, because this was published on the day after the first broadcast or publication of episode 8. So the sort of overnight figure for episode 8 was 100,000 households. So in other words, the overnight viewing figure for The Mandalorian in the UK was something approximating 200,000 people against a weekly consolidated figure of approximately 600,000 people. And that was a massive, massive success. But the success of that is that those people are subscribing to Disney Plus, not that it's getting viewing figures that sort of are in competition with the BBC and ITV. The BBC and ITV are wiping the board with streaming services in terms of viewing figures. But the difference is the streaming services, Disney have got well over 500 million subscribers now. And if you think about it, 500 million subscribers at an average of $10 a month, that's $5 billion a month in subscription monies coming in for Disney Plus a month. And obviously that doesn't all go to Disney Plus. You've got to mitigate that against all the people who take a chunk out of that on the way between the viewers' pockets and the actual service that they're paying for. But that is an incredible amount of money. And so it doesn't matter that The Mandalorian is being watched by fewer than 1 million people in this country. As long as 1 million people in this country are paying for the privilege, it doesn't matter how many people are watching it. And that's the climate that Doctor Who is being watched in. It doesn't really matter. If Doctor Who is being watched by approximately 10 times as many people as The Mandalorian, give or take, that's got to be a success, even if, by comparison with what was happening 10 years ago, it's just a small number compared with what the viewing figures were back then.
I guess it's also complicated slightly by the fact that the BBC is different from Disney. So the BBC have this really odd motivation not to be popular, but to be
worthwhile,
informative, educational.
Worthwhile, I think, is the best way of saying it. Yeah.
It needs to sell itself to the government, basically. And it needs to sell itself to the government by saying, we've got this spread of programs that are generally popular. And we've got this series called Vigil, which is hugely popular. So if you take our money away, then the public will stop voting for you. So we've got to keep on making things like Vigil, but we've also made songs of praise here, which is great for religious people. We do Newsnight, which is great for people that want to follow the news, and Country Files great for farmers, or is it? Maybe not. So they have this kind of spread, and I don't know how they measure popularity, but I do know that it's more complicated than viewing figures.
Absolutely.
But it's more complicated than I understand. So I just allow it to wash over me.
I think as long as, broadcast television is sort of dwarfing the figures for streaming services like that, I think it's justifying its existence. And I do, and just to go off at a slight tangent very briefly, I do think there will always be a place for broadcast television, because there will always be people who want to just come in the house, put the television on, and let it do its thing in the background while they do whatever else instead. So I think there'll always be a place for broadcast television. And I kind of see iPlayer, BritBox, and maybe HBO Max or whatever in other territories outside the UK as being Doctor Who's ultimate destination. But I can imagine a time at which you'll have, say, BBC Live as a broadcast channel, being mostly news, sport, events, some live things like Strictly, whatever, and the very occasional sort of fictional drama getting its first broadcast on the live channel, but most of the stuff living on the streaming platform, the iPlayer and the BritBox. And I can imagine, depending how long it takes to get to this stage, if Doctor Who still has the cachet, then they will still want the programs with the cachet to go out live first on the broadcast channel ahead of the streaming channel in order to justify the existence of the broadcast channel. So I can still imagine programs like Doctor Who being published by way of broadcast before streaming afterwards, regardless of what happens with, Bad Wolf and their sale to Sony, as might be the case, or whatever. So I think whatever we're expecting for the viewing figures for Doctor Who, this is not going to rocket up or anything like that. The viewing figures this year are going to be slightly down on the ones from 18 months ago, because viewing figures in general are still falling, although the rate at which they fall, tends to sort of level out a bit. But I looked at the viewing figures for the first episode of the third series of each of the last three Doctors, and I compared that with the viewing figure for the third series of that Doctor against the previous one, and I also compared that against the viewing figure for the second series debut episode for those Doctors. I'm not going to go through all the figures. I worked out that if the trend in both of those two instances were to continue, we'd get a viewing figure after a 7-day consolidation for Chapter 1 of Flux of 5.68 million viewers. So I'm not expecting it to be that, but I'm saying I would fully expect the ballpark of where the first episode of this Doctor Who to be, just below 6 million, somewhere between 5.5 and 6 million. I looked at the trend of the viewing figures across Doctor Who in toto across the last 15 years and worked out how much it had been decreasing by across those periods and the average decrease. And I worked out that the average across 6 episodes, therefore, of series 13 should probably be in the region of 4.86 million. So I'm not suggesting that I'm going to get these figures right. But what I am saying is, by making this prediction, I'm saying that these are the sort of areas we should look at. And unless it's screamingly below these figures, then we're not having a dilemma. And we know Russell T. Davies is back anyway, so Doctor Who's not in any danger. But I'm saying we shouldn't say that Doctor Who is not a success if it doesn't get much higher than these figures. These are probably the kind of figures that we're looking at in terms of the next 6 episodes broadcast.
I'd like to make a non-mathematical prediction based on no research at all. But I think lockdown, COVID, and the past few years is going to have an impact on how people are going to see the return of Doctor Who, and I think there's going to be a bump in the initial return of Doctor Who. So I think it will be more sort of 6.5 to 7, maybe a little bit higher, because I think people are wanting things like Doctor Who.
Maybe. I would have thought COVID would have had the opposite effect. It's caused more people to buy more streaming services and made them less likely to watch broadcast TV. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, maybe. Who knows? But anyway, I thought I'd bring that up. There's one more thing I want to mention. While I was doing this, I also looked at the AI scores and the chart places. I'm not going to go through it because it's probably boring unless you're really interested in this stuff. In terms of the AI scores, though, there's this sort of overarching fan sort of feeling that the AI scores have been bottoming out and sinking and sinking and sinking, like as if they're on this downward spiral of some kind. The truth is that AI scores increased ever so slightly across the Russell T Davies era. And then after the Russell T Davies era, they began to sink, but only by fractions. So one year, for instance, Series 5 were 97.81% of the year before. So they fell by just over 2%. The most they fell across that entire period was by 3.1%, which is the first Peter Capaldi year. Other than that, they fell by 2.09%, by 1.3%. In other words, they have been falling, but they've been falling by about 1 or 2% per year. And again, going back to what I was saying before about people tuning in 2005 and basically having a choice of about 3, 4 or 5 programs if they wanted to watch something new. And if what they wanted to watch something new was a drama series, it was basically Doctor Who or nothing at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. I would suggest as well that with the lack of Marvel, with the lack of, the kind of Star Wars stuff we're getting now, there wasn't an awful lot around to compare Doctor Who to back then. So, and I'm not saying I don't think the Russell T Davies era wasn't great, but what I will say is that I think the AI scores were probably high then because people didn't have a lot to compare Doctor Who to, and so they didn't have a lot to compare Doctor Who to unfavorably. I would suggest that somebody who's watching, let's say, Aliens in London back in 2005 and has never seen The Mandalorian or has never seen Loki probably thinks Aliens of London is rather better looking, rather more dynamic, rather more like watching a sci-fi movie that just happens to have fetched up on the telly, than somebody watching something like that would nowadays after they've seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier or, the various other things that Disney Plus are putting out or Netflix are putting out or whatever. I think Doctor Who compares less favorably now because there's more in competition with it. And I think that is also partly responsible for driving down the AI scores because people are just getting more used to having more good stuff around, that the sort of relative scores that they give are probably going to reflect the fact that they like other stuff more that just wasn't around earlier on. So I don't know. I think that's a factor. Simon, I've not heard from you for a while. Have you got anything to say about viewing figures or AI scores or anything like that?
I just think much the same as what you've been saying is that these figures will bottom out because it's like trying to measure how popular banks are now by how many checks people are writing.
Yeah.
And it will bottom out to the point where the only people left writing checks are the older generation because that's how they've always done their banking, and eventually that will peter out without being too dark. And I think a very similar thing will happen. And as you say, yeah, I can completely foresee there being a single live channel that was almost like a showcase, is almost like a service and a showcase, and people will always enjoy. Soap operas are appointment TV, and some people's lifestyle, where they'll sit down on a sofa at the beginning of the evening, switch on their favorite channel, and then wait to see what they're entertained with.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of us have got used to, in much the same way as our working lives are like, we keep a diary, we keep a calendar, and we know what's coming up. Is we know that our favorite program will be released on this date and it will be available on this date. And so we make our own arrangements, but and it's about choice, but it doesn't mean, as I say, that you can't measure how successful a bank is by how many checks are being written, because it's not the way things are done anymore. So I'm completely of the same mind as you, that I don't think we need to worry, because with the amount of different material and choice that you get now, that almost everything is niche, and therefore Doctor Who is niche. And
the fact is, even in the niche that it's now in, Doctor Who is, like I said about The Mandalorian, still outperforming all those other things by an order of magnitude that we couldn't even fathom. And yet it just feels like those other things are outperforming it because it's, they get a few hits on social media or whatever when they turn up. So these things are all relative.
It's like you say, worst case scenario is that Doctor Who shifts over to one of these services and therefore is financed by us all paying our $7.99 a month. and the hope is that it's run by people who, the hope is that it's somebody like Netflix who are, although they're money orientated, they do understand that what you do is you give the creatives complete creative control and let them make what they want to make, because that's the best way to do it, is to just leave them to it and let them do things the way they let them do their art. And that is why Netflix is being so successful, because they understand, and Disney, that if you leave the people who love what they do and give them the money they need to create the programs they want to create and have complete artistic freedom, then look what happens. And unfortunately, without going into it, we have a government who I don't think understands that, and are of the viewpoint that the BBC shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them. And I think it will come back to it. It will come back to bite them big style at some point.
I mean, unfortunately, I think our current government would love the BBC to be more like Netflix. That's the thing. That would be the dream, not creatively, but commercially.
Yeah,
that's the irony.
That's kind of partly why I suggest there may be a broadcast channel and a streaming service, and the two might not necessarily be as closely linked as they are now, because with the way BBC Studios is set up, you could foresee that BBC Studios works to put stuff onto the streaming channel, whereas the license fee pays only for stuff that goes out on the broadcast channel. In other words, sport, news, weather, soaps, and the occasional fictional drama. So I don't know. But anyway, I said we'd be talking for half an hour. We're now up to an hour and 20 minutes. So I think it's high time we signed off. We will be doing this each week, depending on my days off, because I have very early starts in my job, so I can't do this if I'm not on a day off. So according to my days off, which I've published, so it's on our Facebook page, we will be doing these. We'll be recording them in the evenings when we can. I'll put the videos out because the videos are available straight away, because I don't need to do any editing for that. I can just publish those straight away. So the videos will go out on the evenings when we record, and the episodes will go out as an audio podcast the following day after I've had a chance to edit. So that's going to be the thing. We're going to put these out as video podcasts for the 6 episodes, because why not? Makes sense to do it like that, I think.
And if you want to burgle JR, he's put his work schedule up online. So you know exactly when he'll be out.
I live with somebody who works from home, so it might not be that easy. Until those things happen, I was JR.
I was Matt.
And I was Simon.
And we will speak again soon.